Political freedom is a central concept in history and political thought and one of the most important features of democratic societies. It was described as freedom from oppression or coercion, the absence of disabling conditions for an individual and the fulfillment of enabling conditions, or the absence of life conditions of compulsion, e.g., economic compulsion in a society. Although political freedom is often interpreted negatively as the freedom from unreasonable external constraints on action, it can also refer to the positive exercise of rights, capacities and possibilities for action, and the exercise of social or group rights. The concept can also include freedom from internal constraints on political action or speech. The concept of political freedom is closely connected with the concepts of civil liberties and human rights, which in democratic societies are usually afforded legal protection from the state. Views. Various groups along the political spectrum naturally differ on what they believe constitutes true political freedom. Left-wing political philosophy generally couples the notion of freedom with that of positive liberty, or the enabling of a group or individual to determine their own life or realize their own potential. Freedom, in this sense, may include freedom from poverty, starvation, treatable disease, and oppression, as well as freedom from force and coercion, from whomever they may issue. Friedrich Hayek, a well-known classical liberal, criticized this as a misconception of freedom. He used of liberty to describe the physical ability to do what I want, the power to satisfy our wishes, or the extent of the choice of alternatives open to us, has been deliberately fostered as part of the socialist argument. The notion of collective power over circumstances has been substituted for that of individual liberty. Anarcho-socialists see negative and positive liberty as complementary concepts of freedom. Such a view of rights may require utilitarian trade-offs, such as sacrificing the right to the product of one's labor, freedom of association for less racial discrimination, or more subsidies for housing. Social anarchists describe the negative liberty-centric view endorsed by capitalism as selfish freedom. Anarcho-capitalists see negative rights as a consistent system. Ayn Rand described it as a moral principle defining and sanctioning a man's freedom of action in a social context. To such libertarians, positive liberty is contradictory, since equal rights must be traded off against each other, debasing legitimate rights which, by definition, trump other moral considerations. Any alleged right which calls for an end result produced by people is, in effect, a purported right to enslave others. Some notable philosophers, such as Alasdair MacIntyre, have theorized freedom in terms of our social interdependence with other people. According to political philosopher Nicholas Compridis, the pursuit of freedom in the modern era can be broadly divided into two motivating ideals. Freedom is autonomy or independence, and freedom is the ability to cooperatively initiate a new beginning. Political freedom has also been theorized in its opposition to power relations, or the power of action upon actions, by Michel Foucault. It has also been closely identified with certain kinds of artistic and cultural practice by Cornelius Castoriadis, Antonio Gramsci, Herbert Marcuse, Jacques Rancière, and Theodore Adorno. Environmentalists often argue that political freedoms should include some constraint on use of ecosystems. They maintain there is no such thing, for instance, as freedom to pollute or freedom to deforest, given that such activities create negative externalities. The popularity of SUVs, golf, and urban sprawl has been used as evidence that some ideas of freedom and ecological conservation can clash. This leads at times to serious confrontations and clashes of values reflected in advertising campaigns, e. e.g., that of Petter regarding fur. John Dalberg Acton stated that the most certain test by which we judge whether a country is really free is the amount of security enjoyed by minorities. History. Hannah Arendt traces the origins of the concept of freedom to the practice of politics in ancient Greece. According to her study, the concept of freedom was historically inseparable from political action. Politics could only be practiced by those who had freed themselves from the necessities of life, so that they could attend to the realm of political affairs. According to Arendt, the concept of freedom became associated with the Christian notion of freedom of the will, or inner freedom, around the 5th century CE, and since then, freedom as a form of political action has been neglected, even though, as she says, freedom is the raison d'etre of politics. Arendt says that political freedom is historically opposed to sovereignty or willpower, since in ancient Greece and Rome, the concept of freedom was inseparable from performance, and did not arise as a conflict between the will and the self. Similarly, the idea of freedom as freedom from politics is a notion that developed in modern times. This is opposed to the idea of freedom as the capacity to begin anew, which Arendt sees as a corollary to the innate human condition of natality, or our nature as new beginnings and hence beginners. In Arendt's view, political action is an interruption of automatic process, either natural or historical. The freedom to begin anew is thus an extension of the freedom to call something into being which did not exist before, which was not given, not even as an object of cognition or imagination, and which therefore, strictly speaking, could not be known.